The Missing Witches podcast is brought to you by the Missing Witches Coven. Our coven mate, poet Sun, said, I came to this coven because nobody else was centering mutual aid and informed resistance like the Missing Witches. But this community is also hugely loving and supportive and full of artists and thinkers and healers who have such a huge diversity of experience. Even when we're not in circle, there's magic afoot. Also, I have a chronic illness, which makes it really hard not to swear all the time. So I am in fabulous company here. Bless the fucking being. And coven mate Jen from Wheel in My Ear wrote, I discovered Missing Witches through Queen of All Queens, Jinx Monsoon's podcast. After reading their contributor covenant, I thought I would give it a chance and attended a new moon circle. As a queer person of color living in a flyover state, I had very low standards. I was used to being burned by performative allyship and virtue signalers. These witches were different. My first circle was a transformative experience as a solitary witch. Missing Witches Coven is what was missing from my practice. I'm so grateful to be found. Anyway, those are some of the people who bring you this podcast. And if that sounds like your people, then come find out more at missingwitches.com. We've been missing you.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
I'm going to take a deep breath. Welcome, listeners. Welcome, witches, spirits, friends, lovers, whoever you're channeling today. Great, bright swaths of color from the future. Thank you for joining us at the Missing Witches podcast. And thank you especially to my guest today. I feel so fluttery and like I have a celebrity crush on this academic writer, which tells you both a lot about me and a lot about her incredible work. Julia Voss is here today. She's the author of the Biography. This is like the one you need if you've seen Hilma of Klint's work and you felt this movement of her and this story about collective creation, these women around her, this story that's slowly unfolding, rewriting abstract expressionist history, teaching us new ways of writing a history of seeing. Like, that's Hilma and the women around her and the person who took the time to go back and read all the journals, all the letters, translate her friends' letters, translate other collaborators, situate us in time, is Julia Voss. And she's here. She said yes. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's my absolute honor to be here. And I'm very, very happy. And thank you so much for this very kind introduction.
It's my pleasure. I actually read the graphic novel that your husband illustrated and then read your afterword and then understood. There's layers of collaborations here. I wondered, would you start off by maybe just talking about how you think about Hilma in the context of collaboration and how that collaboration has been for you?
Oh, that's a good take on starting also. Yeah. So, I mean, it's crystal clear that Hilma af Klint's work is a collaborative work on many levels. So there is the collective of the ghosts and spirits she works with. There is the collective of the women she works with, or maybe we should sort of say the collectives, because it's several collectives of women she works with. And then also working on Hilma af Klint has been a collective journey, I must say. So the first person who actually introduced me to her work is Iris Müller-Westermann, who is an art historian who was back then working in Stockholm at the Moderna Museet. And she took me around in the museum and we went together in one room, and there I saw the first Hilma af Klint painting in my life, which was in 2008. And then Iris told me everything she knew about it. So that was the introduction, and that was the start. And then I said to Iris, back then I was working at a newspaper, and I said, why don't you keep me updated on everything you do on her, and I can report about it in the newspaper. So that was sort of the first collaboration on Hilma af Klint. And I think working on Hilma af Klint makes you meet a lot of other people who are also absolutely in love with her work and with her as a person. So a very important person has also been Halina Dishka, who has done the Hilma of Klint documentary, which is beautiful. And now I'm working together with Daniel Birnbaum on a exhibition actually of Hilma of Klint's work and Kandinsky's work, which is going to be shown next year in Germany. Yes, and I did a collaboration with my own husband, Philip Dines, which came very naturally because once I decided I would write this biography, I spent a lot of time with the research. And there were also journeys we did together. So one journey was to Italy because I wanted to find out whether Hilma af Klint really was in Italy or whether she just kept, a book with drawings that would show kind of famous places and famous towns in Italy. And so we tried together, my husband and I, to track down the places she had in this notebook. And because he can draw himself, he was very helpful in finding these places because once we would go into a hotel and try to check on which level she did a drawing of a church in Florence. And he would say, oh, no, it's not this window, it's another window. And we would look for all the windows. And then we would actually find the very window from which she drew this church. And so that was the beginning. And then, we talked about it a lot. And then we tried to imagine scenes. And I said, it's in a way, it's a pity there's so little photos of hers. There are so many things she did you would like to see, like, her traveling in Italy, for example. And so it came quite naturally that he started doing drawings on her life. And finally, it developed into an entire graphic novel called The 5 Lives of Hilma af Klint.
I love the graphic novel in a different way than I love the biography, specifically because I can see things, I wanna picture what she was like. He takes maybe I don't know if it's liberties, you'll be the one to tell me, but, we see her holding hands with Anna in Italy. We see them in love. And from what I understand in the biography, there's really only, tiny clues that they were there together.
Yeah, there is a note which says that they traveled together.
That's clear.
Yeah, that's clear. The nature of their relationship is not that clear. We know it has been very intense and they worked very closely together. But there's, there's no note that says they had a physical relationship. And somehow they have these names for each other, which is Vestal for Anna and Asket for Hilma. And the Vestal is the priestess in the temple that guards the temple, and that's Anna. And the Asket is named after living as, how do you say that? Ascetic in English?
Ascetic.
Ascetic?
Yeah.
So in a way, the very fact that they have chosen these names makes me think that they had a very strong platonic love rather than a physical love. But who knows?
Yeah. Well, it seems too like they seems like maybe they struggled with it. Like they were halves of the same entry point, the same archway into some way of understanding, but maybe it was too far.
Yeah, I mean, that's also something you can find in the notebooks. I mean, there's a lot of sexual energy, I think, in the paintings. You can see that. And there are also things that look like sexual symbols. I mean, there are things that look like ovaries or sperms, and also how things move in these paintings. They often sort of melt with each other or inseminate each other. So you have the feeling that it's a lot of connecting with other entities in all kind of different ways. And sex is one way of connecting with other entities. So, and also in the notebooks, there is a lot of kind of coded talking about sexual. And I think because there's one notebook, which is not by Hilma af Klint, but by one of her female friends, who actually also lives with her for a while in the same apartment. And this person called Sigrid Lancén, she describes Hilma and her kissing and hugging and sharing a bed. So, maybe because we have this record of something actual happening, that I tend to be more cautious with the other women.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's fair, right? Like we don't have to paint her entire life with one brush to say there was relationships of this kind, and she found her seems like she found her life partner by the end, but there were
Yeah.
times in her life where that wasn't what it was, and maybe that didn't feel, like, safe to be that way at that time.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, there wasn't. I mean, they don't even really use a word for it. So they wouldn't,
Yeah.
they wouldn't talk about homosexuality, or they wouldn't, refer to themselves as lesbians or same-sex relationship. All these words didn't exist. I mean, I guess that existed somewhere, but they didn't use them. So, for example, one of the coded descriptions is that they talk about Spartan. Do you say Spartan love?
Yeah.
And that is because there are sources that reported that the Spartans, you call them Spartans?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That Spartan women had sexual relations with other women. Like in antiquity, a lot of Greek men had sexual relations with other men. Some authors believe that this was also true for Spartan women. And so they talk about Spartan love. And I think this is like a code word or a way of, for themselves to get sort of an idea about the way they want to live.
Yeah.
And also to find maybe historic forerunners for
Right.
what they are doing. I think for women, it might have been a bit easier to share that kind of love
Mm.
because women living together was nothing people, cared about. And I think probably a lot of people would have been less suspicious of women sharing lives than they were of men. But still, I guess, yeah, it's something they had to develop themselves and see how they wanted to practice what. And since there were a lot of women, I guess all each of them had a different idea of what should be done and could be done and could not be done.
How do you think the channeling practices, the medium practices, all of those aspects of the rituals that they participated in and in some senses created, how do you think those spaces served for them as a way of like talking through things like that, talking through ideas? Or how do you think that happens in general? Have you participated in a channeling session? What do you think happens? Do you think there's an aspect where this was a way of liberating some ways of talking about things? It's coming out in automatic writing, and so I can detach from what I'm allowed to know and sort of open up
Yeah,
questions.
yeah, yeah. I guess this is what happened. That in a way, I mean, much later, the Surrealist movement used the kind of same techniques in order to release feelings they had and desires they had. And I think the automatic drawings also are full of desire, and also the text. I think the text also developed when you look at the first collective, the five. It's much less sort of sexual than later. I think especially from 1905, 6 onwards, the language is much more energetic, and there are many more sexual symbols in it, and something new develops. And you also can see that on the canvases. I mean, there are also a man and a woman shown having sex actually on one canvas, so it's pretty explicit. Yeah, I believe these rituals were there in order to release that. Unfortunately, sort of for my taste, the rituals are pretty, if you look at what happened, I tend to think that something extraordinary must have been there before, but it's not like they do anything that's more than holding hands and praying. They do quite normal things to unleash and to release this ecstasy that comes. So there is some magic that happens that is not quite explicable by the rituals they're performing.
Hmm. Say more about that. Where do you think that magic is, or what is it?
The magic?
Hmm. That was there before. What does that mean? Or just unpack more of what you're thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that takes us right to the center. I mean, I've been trained as an art historian, and so in the beginning, I wasn't really at ease with all of this. I thought, this in the beginning, I thought maybe people have overdone it because, often that's a kind of stereotype that, I don't know, a woman is kind of turned into this crazy, weird witch that does these paintings, because we don't have any better explanation for that. But then I learned Swedish and also started reading the notebooks, and it's all over, nobody has overdone it. It's just on every page. And I don't have any good explanation for that. And I also cannot really categorize it, but I really enjoy the beauty of it. So it took me a while in order to find a good example that would help me to write about it. And in the end, I think the literature that helped me most was not art history, but it was like real literature. Like, I reread Isabel Allende. Is it House of Ghosts in English?
House of Spirits?
House of Spirits, maybe, yeah. And it really helped me just to stick to the phenomenology, because in magic realism, all these things happen at the same time, and you're not forced to explain it. It's just there. And this is in the end how I decided to treat the notebooks. I'm not there in order to sort of explain who these spirits are and where they come from, or whether we should sort of explain them away by saying, I don't know, that it was their way being able to do what they wanted to do. I don't want to put any psychology in there, and I don't want to put any sociology in there. It's what it is. I mean, she left these notebooks, and I don't have a better explanation. Hilma af Klint herself wondered her entire life what she was in touch with. She tried to explore it in many ways, and she didn't have a clear-cut answer. I mean, I think towards the end of her life, the spirits she talks to, they tend to refer to her as a mystic. So I guess she accepted that. But it's not like she has a simple theory of what was happening to her. And I don't have one. But it's beautiful. I think that's the most important thing.
I do love the way it's treated in your book. I felt like, on the one hand, I really appreciate your sort of refusing to dismiss her spirituality, her mediumship, but also like, let's ground. She was an artist. She was a professional, very well trained working artist for money. She tried to exhibit her work repeatedly. She understood what she had made. What she painted, she didn't do in some sort of, maybe I'm wrong about this. It doesn't seem like it was like a fugue state that we could say, oh, she wasn't even the author. She was overcome. Like, she's clearly technically incredibly proficient in making choices, but both sides are real. She also is painting a commission from the spirit world.
Yeah. What was important for me to see is that it's a dialogue between her and the spirit world. Because in the beginning, I was also off-put by the idea that it's commission. Because I thought, here we have a brave woman who does all these beautiful paintings, and then it's just a commission by someone else, by some sort of higher beings.
Right.
But the more I read, the more I understood. For example, the spirits ask her, would you like to do that? And then she answers yes. And then, when she has moments where she's unhappy, they support her and they try to cheer her up, or they applaud her on her paintings. So they're also like invisible friends to her. And it's good to see that it's not a hierarchical relationship where someone sort of commissions something and then she executes it, and then something new is being commissioned, but it's a dialogue. And yeah, this was for me a relief to see. And I think you're also right, it's a mixture. And she also talks about this later on. In the 30s, she gives a lecture at the Anthroposophical Society in Sweden. And she talks about the relationship of being given something and developing something, and that she feels like both ways are justified. And she has experienced both. She has experienced being given something, but she also has experienced developing something. And I think it both comes together. I mean, particularly if you look at these giant canvases, that's nothing you can do, if you're not fully on the project you're working on. It's nothing you can do sort of with closed eyes and not
Right. I
not
mean, she's
knowing what you're
physically
doing.
making the paint. She's stretching massive canvases. She's
Yes.
working from symbols that she's developed over decades. She's
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
active participant.
Yeah. And she also tries to talk I mean, her real friends, her female friends, to help her. So there is a collaboration between her and Anna Castle, on the first series called Primordial Chaos. And then, but also it seems to be like there has been tensions, and this is also being talked about in the notebooks, that sort of it says that Anna should decide whether she wants to paint or whether she doesn't. And then Anna drops out, and then later on it's Cornelia who helps her with the large canvases of the 10 largest. And then Cornelia drops out. And so, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of choices, and is a lot of work, and there are a lot of practical things that need to be done in order to make these paintings. So, yeah, I guess it's both. It's something she received and something she developed herself.
What do you think about the idea in the Saga of the Rose book and the essays in there that Anna's paintings are like the prayer book to go alongside the imagined temple, that like these two things are halves and that they belong together?
I mean, this is also something that comes up in the notebooks. In the notebooks, there are several passages where both works are treated, Hilma af Klint's work and Anna Cassell's work, and they are treated as separate entities that could potentially both be part of the temple. And in one passage I think of now it says that Hilma af Klint's paintings would be the paintings of the future, whereas Anna's paintings would be the paintings of the past, of the Akasha Chronicle. So, yeah, I think they're believed to be two parts of one thing, although so far we have only studied Hilma af Klint notebooks, and it's clear that also in terms of dimensions and in terms of size, that Hilma af Klint paintings are the dominant ones. There are also passages where they talk about how much space these works should take up. For example, in the shared studio house they built on Munzu, and it's said that Hilma af Klint should receive like 3/4 of it, and Anna should receive 1/4 of it. So I guess they are twins, but they are kind of uneven twins, let's say.
Yeah. Something about the size too. Hilma's paintings are different in
Ye
scale.
Yeah. And it also seems, I mean, Hilma af Klint has exhibited her work during lifetime. There's one exhibition we know of in 1913, and there is one exhibition also in London later in the late 20s. It's her paintings of the temple that she shows in London. So I guess among them, there was a kind of tension, what exactly the relation was between these paintings, between these works.
What do you think the ideal future home for these works is? It seems like there's debate among members of the foundation, or there's legal things. I can't really follow all of it, but what would your dream version of it be?
That's a very good question, because I mean, what I really like about Hilma af Klint's idea of the temple is that it's something, on the one hand, something outward, a building, but on the other hand, it's also something inward. It's something you build in yourself, and she built in herself, and the women around her built in themselves. So it's a work that needs to be done inwardly and outwardly. And on the one hand, the situation now is quite beautiful, that these works travel all over the world and people get to see them in Europe, in Australia, in North America. 25, they go to Asia also. So this is beautiful, but this is also something that's not very sustainable for the paintings, because, traveling is not good for paintings because it damages them. I wonder, it's also, I mean, it's clear we want to have a place that could be visited by a lot of people. And since Hilma af Klint thought of her paintings as something that should stay together, probably a building in Sweden would be the place to be. But I'm cautious. I think, yeah, I don't know. I but also maybe sorry.
It seems like it's a emotional question somehow, right? Where do these live?
Yeah,
how do we honor them? Where do they go?
yeah. No, that's a very good way of putting it. It's a very emotional question. And since there are so many debates already, I'd rather talk with a lot of people and see what can be developed rather than say, oh, this is the right place or this should be done. I think a lot of people should be involved, and then there should be a broad discussion of what should be done. And I also like the ideas of what's happening right now, that there are loans to several museums. I mean, this is usually in art history, this is usually how an oeuvre is being spread, right? You have a lot of museums that show works by these artists, and that's the best way of making sure that a big audience can see them. And so just putting everything in one place, in one building, could also feel a bit claustrophobic. I don't know. Maybe it's beautiful, maybe it's a temple and it's beautiful, but maybe it would also mean that a lot of people can never see them because it's just too far away and too difficult to reach. I also wonder, maybe this is heretic, but I also wonder, I mean, she didn't sign her paintings, right? And we also know that there's one series she copied. So we have two versions of it. The Tree of Knowledge series exists with the Hilma of Klint Foundation. And then there's an almost identical copy that was done by herself, which has been sold to the Glenstone Museum and was shown in the David Swinner galleries in New York and London. And, in the Middle Ages, this would have been the way to spread a work, is you copy it, you multiply it, and then take it to a lot of different places, libraries. And I sometimes wonder whether this could also be a way. Maybe there should be several versions.
Yeah, I like that too. Although, if it were me, I would insist upon them beginning, with ritual and
Yeah, no,
inviting
it
those
can.
collaborators.
No, absolutely. I mean, it shouldn't be copied in a casual way.
Right.
You would have these sacred books of the Middle Ages. Take, for example, Hildegard's visionary works. They were illustrated and copied and multiplied at several places, and that was the way to spread them.
I love that idea. As soon as you said this might be heretical, I was on board. Can you talk about, like, so she's studying, she's interested in Blavatsky, and then she kind of leaves it behind it with Steiner when he makes his break, and she says repeatedly, that she's working with Steiner and this is anthroposophist work, but it also seems like she's going her own place. Does that sound right to you? Like, what does she exist just in one of these traditions? Is she just trying to illuminate his thoughts, or is there something more that she's saying on her own or channeling on her own?
Oh, I would very much see it that she's, there's a lot she's saying on her own. And that's also how Steiner saw it, I think. He didn't see her work as something that would perfectly illustrate what he was doing. I think the relation to Steiner is a difficult and troubled one. For a lot of people, Steiner completed what a lot of people tried to do. So, I mean, Steiner built this beautiful anthroposophical center in Switzerland, started in 1914 and then was finished. And then Hilma af Klint also went there, actually 9 times in the 1920s. And so Steiner was the one who was really able to construct this entire universe, which had, a building, which burned down, but he rebuilt it, a building, text, art. He collaborated with a lot of artists. And maybe I sometimes wonder whether this was also something that attracted Hilma af Klint a lot, because he completed what he wanted to do. And it's absolutely clear that he comes up in all her writings. She cites him a lot. She has, almost every of his books. she gets a lot of ideas from Steiner, and she's inspired a lot by his writings. And you can see that also. I mean, for example, if you take the series Tree of Knowledge, there is a text by Steiner which is very close to what she's actually drawing. It's a tree that is turned upside down. It's a kind of travel that you do inside your body and outside in the universe. And Steiner talks about it. And it's, I think when you read this text and you look at the paintings, you feel there's a very closeness and there's a lot of fondness in her paintings of his thinking. So while he was still alive, she didn't manage to get his full attention. I mean, it looks like they met around 1910, probably, and that he actually saw her paintings and commented on them, but he wasn't taken by them. It's not like he thought, oh, wow, this is excellent, and I would like to have them in the Goetheanum, and we should work together. He doesn't discourage her. He doesn't say, like, I mean, that's a myth that developed later. He doesn't say, like, stop and burn it and don't think about it again. But he also doesn't encourage her to bring everything to Dornach and, have it there. So she tries over and over again to press him to get kind of a definitive answer on what he thinks of her paintings, and he dies before Hilma of Klint gets it. And then something interesting happens. So later in her notebooks, Steiner comes up a lot, and they actually talk to each other. So it's Hilma of Klint, the living Hilma of Klint, talking to the dead Steiner, and suddenly they're one, how do you say, one heart and one soul?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he even gives her advice on how to color something and how to proceed and so forth. So from her perspective, later on, they had a very good relationship and it was very close. They even found a spiritual university together. So something, got better.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you sort of unpack that, because there is this sort of like you Google Hilma of Klint, you're gonna get stories about how Steiner told her that the world wouldn't be ready for her work for 50 years. And then Julia Voss goes through all the notebooks and is like, never happened.
Yeah, I can see how the myth developed, because
Yeah.
it's like, a line in one book and then, it's taken a bit further in the next book. And there was a degree of disappointment in Hilma of Klint, that's clear. She would have liked if she got his full support, and she didn't get that. So there is a little bit of truth in it. And the other thing is that Steiner was really skeptical of visionaries. This kind of working sort of unconsciously and completely receiving something wasn't something he was fond of. And I sometimes wonder, this is just speculating, but I sometimes wonder, Steiner was in Weimar before he joined the Theosophical Society. And in Weimar, he experienced also Nietzsche, who was then in a state of almost unconsciousness and had all kind of outbreaks. And he was the first biographer of Nietzsche's, actually. And I sometimes wonder whether he associated with being, in these hallucinatory states, whether this reminded him of Nietzsche, which was a very sort of off-putting example of someone sort of losing his consciousness. And maybe that was an experience that he digested by staying away from that. And in a way, it took me a while to understand that these kind of visionary states or ecstatic states Hilma af Klint was in were actually something very enriching and beautiful for her, because we have a lot of cases of people who work kind of in a visionary state or in a ecstatic state and have these breakdowns afterwards. And that's,
Right.
That's also something very scary. And I think the difference with Hilma af Klint is that she managed so well with reaching out to the other side.
Yeah, and there's bits you quote that sort of indicate that she changed in how she saw her relationship with the messages she was receiving, that she had to become more of like a chooser. She had to become more of a interlocutor or something with the messages coming through, that the nature of her relationship with that world changed, maybe in a way that Steiner wanted her to reach for or something.
I think, I mean, it's inevitable if you make these experiences a lot, you develop a way of dealing with it. And I think this is something that also happened to her, that it, you know, from probably being very overwhelming in the beginning, that it became more manageable the longer she did it. And also, I think she tried different channels. So from when World War I rages, almost at the end of it, she develops this very pantheistic attitude towards what's around her. So I think in the beginning, you would always have these flowers in her paintings, and you would have all kind of organic forms. But then she turns to actual flowers in her environment and tries to channel their souls, and succeeds. This might have been another door to entering another consciousness, through a kind of pantheistic melting with the world that's around you.
What do you think? We talk about paintings for the future. She was writing for us somehow, or painting for us. She was throwing images forward. I interviewed an academic who writes about witchcraft and channeling, and she said when she saw the Hilma show at the Guggenheim, she felt so emotional, feeling like this woman had succeeded in tossing these seeds, that they were for us. She threw them far enough that we caught them.
Yeah.
What do you feel? I guess it's not so much a question of what do you feel she was trying to toss us, because I think sometimes she wasn't clear what the messages were. But what do you feel like when you've looked at all these paintings and read all these notebooks? What are you left with wanting to underline or yell loud on her behalf?
Or she wouldn't want me to yell.
Yeah. Just very politely.
Yeah.
State.
I mean, what I find really touching and really, I mean, you're right, it really feels like a gift. And I think this is why people are so moved when they see it, because they feel like something generous is offered to them. And it's not rigid in the sense like it says, this is the system you believed in. Actually, it's all wrong. Here's the new system. Take it. It's more like, it's very tentative, right? I mean, it's more like, why don't you try to connect with something else and reach out and put your feelers out in order to build a bridge, and then let something new come in and develop. And I think this is the idea, that you never stop. If you are open for the things around you, and if you try to connect with them, then what you receive is that it's a lifelong evolution, and maybe even longer. If there is a message, that's the message. That it's a message of the gift of lifelong evolution, and even beyond that.
I love that you said, why don't you put your feelers out, as like sort of one of the messages from her. Can you talk more about how we see that in the paintings?
Mm-hmm. So there are actually, I mean, in the 10 largest, you have these, it's also in Primordial Chaos. One organism that comes up again and again is the snail, right? And the snail with feelers. And there are also, in one of the 10 largest, you see two snails sort of touching each other with the feelers. So I think this is why the metaphor of the feelers also came up for me. But it comes again and again in different forms. So sometimes you see two things that go into each other, and then, a blue circle meets an orange circle, and they make green together. And also in a series like Passivo, it's almost like two planets, and then one planet sends out something that, it could be a seed, or it could be even a spaceship, and then it flies to the other planet, and then the other planet gets illuminated, and then it returns something that goes back again. So this reaching out and trying via moving and whirling to get to something else, I think it's almost in every painting.
Yeah, me too. So you come to these paintings with so much more than I do here at Art Historian. And you had that moment where you saw the first one, and then you went and you saw more, and you saw them in a context of art history. What stood out? Like, why were they important? Why were they beautiful? What did you know about them when you saw them and you knew the context of art history? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So the first time I saw them in 2008 when I was in Stockholm, they were presented, I think they were surrounded by Russian constructivist works. And I felt color-wise because it was a painting from the Swan. There are two that are very geometrical. One is red, one is black, and they have these circles in the middle. They are sort of cut in half. And I thought, wow, color-wise, this white, red, and black really looks like Russian constructivism. But on the other hand, it also looks more organic. It's less rigid, and it looks strange. And maybe, and when I saw them, I thought maybe they were done a little bit later. And I think a lot of paintings look like they could have been done much later. And then, as I said, Iris Müller-Westermann started telling me about what she knew about it. But yeah, I mean, in terms of art history, the story we have been told over and over again is basically that Western art abstraction was invented by these men, starting from 1911, starting with Kandinsky and then Mondrian and Malevich, and that they sort of turned this into a style, and then more and more people joined in. And I think that's one of the reasons why it took so long to rediscover Hilma af Klint, because she completely crushes everything of that story of art history. Suddenly it's a woman, suddenly it's earlier, suddenly she's not in Paris, Moscow, or Berlin, or Munich, but she's in Sweden. Suddenly we have spirituality written back into the story. I mean, that's something actually that was very important also for Kandinsky, but I think it was written out of his story later on when his works became famous. A lot of people thought, that's too strange. Let's not talk about it. And so, yeah, she seemed to be kind of this odd person who would challenge art history to either rewrite everything they believed in or leave her outside. And this is what happened for a long time. But now she's back in, for sure.
Now she's in.
Yeah.
Oh, now she's big news. Pharrell made NFTs of her work, or I mean, there's so many people trying to bring her work into different spaces, capitalize on it, or make it accessible.
Yeah. I mean, capitalizing on it is difficult because they all belong one foundation and they're not selling. Every now and then something comes up on the market. These are works that have been given away by her during lifetime, and they were sold. So the second version of the Tree of Knowledge was sold to David Zwirner, and then the Museum of Modern Art actually has acquired a big series from the 1920s. But looking at the complete body of work, the big works all belong to the foundation, and it doesn't look like they are selling. So this is also outstanding. I mean, usually if people enter the stage of art history or come back on the stage of art history, there's also a market that fuels that rediscovery and makes these works circulate. And in Hilma af Klint's case, that's not what has brought her back. And I think this is also very extraordinary.
Is there anything you feel like people aren't talking about enough about her work? When you read articles or books about it, you're like, spend more time on this piece, or someone investigate this.
Oh gosh, I mean, there's so many things that could be talked about, and I'm sure we will keep on discovering things in our works that we have overlooked before. Actually, right now, working on Hilma af Klint and Kandinsky on the show that will be shown next year in Düsseldorf in Germany, I'm discovering so many new things in her paintings because you actually look at them for a longer time and then you realize, oh gosh, this is an allusion to that and so forth. So, I mean, this is one thing I'm spending a lot of time on now, is looking at the paintings and trying to figure out what inspires her beyond the spirit world. Because sometimes there are also allusions to iconic traditions that that are also there. As you said, she's a trained artist. She knows art history, and she has traveled. She has looked at a lot of things. She has notebooks with drawings of other paintings. She looks at Rembrandt. She looks at folk art. She looks at a lot of things, probably also from her time, that she doesn't bother to take down in her notebooks, but that were there. So that's something I'm interested in. But this is maybe a bit sort of art historical jigsaw playing. What I really liked when I saw the exhibition on Mondrian and Hilma af Klint is that they stressed so strongly her kind of ecological view of the world. And I think particularly when she starts in 1917, when she gets more and more pantheistic and connects with flowers and connects with small organisms around her, that gets very strong in her work. And I think this is something that would also help us to get, for me, I mean, there are people who already have a better relationship to the world around them. But I think in order to get a different idea of nature, rather than just looking at nature as a resource, but actually respecting nature as something that is a being in its own and has a life and has individuals and organisms we should connect with, I find her work really helpful for building a bridge. And I think this will make us think a lot more. And we will come back to this.
Yeah, I think so too. There's been so much brilliant work, mostly by you, putting her into a rewriting of abstract expressionism. But do you think there's another lineage that she belongs in? Like there's mystics, revelatory
Yeah.
women, Monica Shaw, Hildegard of Bingen. Is there a different story there still to be told? What are we learning from these women who tried so hard to tell something that they couldn't tell in their present, it feels like?
Yeah. I mean, certainly there is a tradition of visionary women. She also, I think, at least explored whether she should put herself into that. So there is a notebook where she looks back at visionaries and also touches upon Hildegard of Bingen. And Hildegard of Bingen is someone, actually, I think I discovered through Hilma of Klint, because, I mean, I knew the name before, but then I saw in the notebook, and then Bingen is in Germany. I went there and looked at things and so forth. So yeah, I think the beauty of it is really that there are a lot of things that we cannot really explain. And I mean, with Hildegard von Bingen, we also have people, even like Oliver Sacks, who is usually a brilliant author, and I like his writing a lot. But he had this idea that Hildegard of Bingen basically suffered from migraine. But a lot of people have headaches and migraines, but it's not like they come up with the same things. And if you look at her paintings, her visionary paintings, she didn't do them herself, but the experts I trust say that she commissioned them, right? She commissioned them and told the nuns who executed them how to do them. And so if you look at these small paintings from the 12th century, it's really extraordinary, because they're all kind of allusions to texts and pictures from that time. But nevertheless, they also look like nothing that was being done at the same time. And we have to come to grips with that. We have to accept it in a way. Whatever it is, whatever that kind of state is, and wherever it comes from, it's a kind of state that was able to produce something that we don't have any better explanation for. And I love that. It reintroduces a kind of wonder into history. And I think, we should be modest and accept that.
Yeah.
Unless we come up with a better explanation. But so far, I'm reading the book by Margaret Fassler, who is a professor in North America. And she has a way of explaining everything in these paintings. It's beautiful. I mean, she can, open them like a nut and then sort of say, this is this and this is that, and explain everything. But, at the same time, although she can make these pictures talk, it's still a mystery where they come from, where these forms come from, and how they ended up in Bingen, of all places.
Right. And it sometimes feels to me like they belong more in a continuous history with indigenous abstract work that expresses spiritual worlds, that there's this real long 10,000, 30,000 year history of
Yeah.
people making.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, I know very little about it, but I remember when the Hilma af Klint's work were traveling to Australia and New Zealand, I thought, gosh, how do they connect with the abstract traditions they have there from the indigenous people who have done these beautiful abstract paintings for a long, long time? Loads of them are much older than anything we can imagine. So you're right. I mean, this is also something I would love to read. I can't write it, but I would love to read it.
We do. Listeners, you have two of us first in line when you write this missing book we
Yes,
need.
please. Please. Hey, hello. Were you listening all the time?
Yes, and I'm
Right.
very starstruck. Your book is incredible. Do you have time for just a quick question? Do you think Hilma, when she created art for the future, do you think she was at peace with that, or do you think she really struggled to surrender to it?
I'm trying to see whether I get you right. So that it's not for the contemporaries, but for the future, whether this is something that she also found slightly disappointing.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, yes, I believe she struggled with that. So I mean, we can see that she was busy trying to exhibit her work until the late 20s. And, and it didn't go well. And it must have been a disappointment for her. If you are willing, for example, to ship all your works to London and, speak at an exhibition, even though you don't know English, and, you make all the travel and you pay for it even yourself and everything, then not getting, I don't know, a lot of attention is something that must have been very disappointing.
Right.
And also the fact, that Steiner was nice and polite, but not, out of his mind when he saw her works is also something that I thought found difficult. And also, I mean, she was very inventive in the many ways she tried to reach an audience. So we see from 1919 onwards that she suddenly switches to German, which I think is also a contribution by Thomasine, because Thomasine can speak German. And then Hilma af Klint switches to German and produces these texts in German. And I think they were meant to be for a German audience. And she thought, if I go to Dornach, if I go to Switzerland, if I go to the Goetheanum, which was built by Steiner, I can reach this audience that speaks German. Maybe suddenly everything is different and I find a lot of friends. And it didn't happen. And then she made these blue albums in which she did little reproductions of her work as photographs and as little watercolors. And they were also meant, to allow her works to travel. And we even know that they went to Amsterdam and they were sort of handed around in the audience of a talk at the Anthroposophical Society, which was given by a friend of Hilma's. So she tried to open up all these channels, exhibitions, texts, albums, reproductions, and it took her nowhere during lifetime, or, it wasn't a huge success. And I think that was a disappointment. But then again, what's great with her is that she didn't sort of turn it around and thought, okay, maybe the others are right. And I'm just, a stupid fool doing these, I don't know, canvases nobody's interested in. Let's forget about it. But instead she decides, okay, so that's the world I live in. I have to accept it, but I'm sure there are better times to come. I'll give that work to the future. And then again, a kind of a rush of creativity came, and she had these ideas for how to build a temple and where to build it and so forth. So I don't know, again, she managed to, in a way, start over new. I mean, this is also something that really impresses me, the fact that she has the power and the strength to start over and over again. That is something very cool.
Remarkable.
Very
Thank you.
remarkable.
And she must be working through you to get her artwork out to the rest of us in the world. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
The great collaboration continues. Thank you so much again, Julia. It's such a treat to meet you. Please also tell your husband how much I love his book. I've shown it to
I
everyone.
will, and he will be very happy about it.
It's just so cool to see Yeah, just to like get to feel her, like the paintings, the drawings where she's like floating in the world of the art.
Yeah, I
Or
like them a lot too.
ugh.
And I think this is also, I mean, this is, I mean, I guess it depends, but sometimes when I see her works in exhibitions and there are not too many people, it really feels like you can enter them.
Mm.
And they are portals and they are doors and they open up a new world. And I love in the graphic novel that you get a feeling of that, that she is part of this world and that it's a universe. It's not just something flat on a canvas, but it's a whole universe she opens up.
Oh, thank you so much. Is there anything you want to tell the listeners about how they can find you and support you, and where do you want them to send their love and excitement?
Oh, that's so sweet of you. So actually, in these days, the audiobook is coming out
Ah,
of the biography, and it has been read by Doria Bramante, and we will make a post soon. So maybe I recommend that. And I'm on Instagram. You found me on Instagram. And, you know, any thoughts and love and considerations, I'm more than welcome.
wonderful. We'll include the link to your Instagram and everything else we can find in the show notes as usual. And bless if I can be.
Great.
You must be a witch.
The Missing Witches podcast is created by Risa Dickens and Amy Torak with insight and support from the Coven. Amy and Risa are the co-authors of Missing Witches, Reclaiming True Histories of Feminist Magic and of New Moon Magic, 13 anti-capitalist tools for resistance and re-enchantment. Available now wherever you get your books or audiobooks. Find out more at missingwitches.com.